Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one, we are taking a look at tonight's new featured location, which is Aunt May's. Aunt May's reads, the first card you play here gets +3 power and moves. So we're going to be taking a look at the decks that can best utilize this new location, starting off with a budget move deck. So I wanted to create something a little bit more budget friendly for the players who might only be early pool 3 or maybe not even pool 3 at all. I tried to limit I actually think we only have one pool 3 card here in Miles, which is probably replaceable with another card, something like maybe Forge. Actually, Human Torch is pool 3 too. So 2 pool 3 cards here, definitely replaceable. You can still play the deck without them, but I do think if you have access to them, you probably will want to include them. Another card you can also consider is if you bought the Battle Pass, Ghost Spider obviously is a very good inclusion here if you have access to her, but budget inclusions, you could also consider Nightcrawler for a deck like this, obviously going to be a good choice, as well as something like Chavez, as this deck does really value that early game draw consistency, as drawing the deck out of order is pretty problematic. So this is our first deck. Pretty simple. We're just running all the good early move cards, and I think it will definitely get a boost from this location. This should be a pretty decent deck if you don't really have access to a whole lot of cards yet, but still want to play into the location and play some kind of move deck to take advantage of it. Another deck that I think is really good if you want to go into the move theme is the Wave move deck. This is actually almost card for card the list I used to hit Infinite this month, originally built by Moyen, really good Marvel Snap player and competitor. And I like this deck a lot. It was good without a location that is beneficial to move. Silk is a new addition. If you don't have it, that's okay. A card you can consider as a replacement would probably be something like Doctor Strange, or just another decent 2-drop. Jeff could also fill the role there. You could also try something to boost up the Human Torch's power if you want to go a little bit more in that direction. But generally, 2-drops are preferred here, as we want something powerful we can play with Wave on turn 5, and then we're going to be closing out the game with either Arrow or Heimdall. Nice thing about this is a lot of opponents end up expecting the Heimdall, so sometimes you can catch them off guard. If you want to get really cheeky with it, you could even arguably cut the Heimdall from this deck and run something like Doctor Doom in its place, and I bet you'll catch a lot of people off guard making kind of odd plays that they wouldn't normally make to try and play around Heimdall when you can just catch them with Doctor Doom, especially after a wave. Then we have the Stature Stats deck. This is a deck that I think continues to be criminally underrated. I played a bunch of it today in Conquest, which, by the way, if you do not care for this location at all, you can always go and play some Conquest, as Conquest is not impacted at all by the hot or featured locations. But yeah, this deck is still putting up really, really solid numbers in spite of the fact that the vast majority of players have moved away from it. I know personally I've seen a lot less Darkhawk recently, and with the Lockjaw deck with High Evo becoming a very popular force in the meta, what better time to be investing in putting rocks into your opponent's deck? This deck is just really good at putting out a lot of power while interacting with your opponent with things like the rocks, as well as discarding a card from their hand with Black Bolt, or just blowing up their big thing with Shang-Chi, which is very important in a deck like this, as a lot of other decks are able to go taller with things like the Hulk or the Lockjaw decks if they don't roll rocks out of the Lockjaw. So Shang-Chi really important here. And I cut Enchantress from this list. Feel like it's not super missed. I found the extra power from Shuri has been very relevant, and Shuri can also be not as telegraphed if you save it for the final turn. Especially if you have a 1-cost Miles or a 1-cost Stature or both, you can really catch people by surprise, getting a really powerful thing in a lane that you might not otherwise have a lot of power in. Mr. Fantastic is kind of just a flex 3-drop. You could also consider Polaris in that spot as well, but I like spreading the power around a bit. And the same is true with Nebula and Ghost Spider. These are kind of flex cards. You don't necessarily need them to play the deck, though I do think they are fairly decent in the deck. And if you want to replace them, you probably just go for a solid 1-drop, solid 2-drop. Nightcrawler used to be used a lot. Iceman, another popular one. Cards like that. Jeff is also one I'd consider, though unfortunately he is not a very budget substitution right now. But yeah, those are some things you could consider if you want to change out those cards because you might not have access to them. Then we have Evo Lane Lock. This deck is continuing to be very, very dominant even after the recent change to Spider-Man. I used to really not be a fan of Professor X and Daredevil in the list. It didn't feel like they were needed, but after the Spidey change, where we are no longer floating on 5 a lot of the time anyway because of the new Spider-Man, the redundancy has been fairly relevant, and Professor X obviously is going to be pretty good with this location, because if we're going to be seeing a lot of move decks going around, then we're going to be able to just shut them down by playing Professor X in the middle and really mess up their ability to move around all over the board. And obviously the other high Evo stuff is really, really good in decks like this, because as long as we can close down one lane with our lane lock stuff, a lot of the time Hulk will be enough to win another lane on his own, or we can always go the go wide approach with Dr. Doom, so it makes it really hard for the opponent to play around. Then we have Sarah Surfer with a little bit of move thrown into it. So we do have Vulture to take advantage of the location. We have Polaris and Miles here, as well as Jeff, because basically the idea is we're trying to move something on turn 3, whether that be with the location or with one of our own cards. That way on turn 4, before we play our Sarah, we can play a 3-drop in Miles, so kind of helps fill out the curve a bit, which is something Silver Surfer has always kind of struggled with a bit. This deck is also fairly good at holding priority, which makes Cosmo better. Another card that probably would be good in this list would be Silk. I opted to not include it for this one because I didn't want it to be too high budget, but if you do have access to Silk, it's definitely a card you could consider for this list. Goose has definitely been an all-star as well in the Sarah deck, mainly because it shuts down a lot of the big plays the opponents are trying to make on the final turn, most notably Hulk, but a lot of other big things as well. Makes it pretty awkward for them, especially given the fact that there doesn't seem to be quite as much Zabu around as there was previously. And then Killmonger, just because sometimes we need that extra boost of power from Nova, and it gives us a way of respecting some of the decks with powerful 1-drops like Kitty Pryde, as well as the 1-drops that the high Evo lane control sometimes leans very hard on. And that is going to wrap it up for tonight's decks for the Aunt May's hot location. As always, links to the decks will be in the description if you want to import any of them yourselves. And if you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.